Welcome to the next edition and iteration of the Literature of Sustainability series from the UNESCO Chair. We are delighted to have with us today Cecelia Asberg, Linköping University, Sweden, an old friend of the events that the Chair has organized, a specialist in multiple fields in the blue humanities and related areas. Welcome to all of you who are, several of whom are regulars, some new ones. Our focus today is SDG 14, Life Below Water. So thank you, Cecelia, for finding the time. I know you're recovering from a bad case of cold and cough, but you've assured us that you are armed, not with necessarily blue humanities stuff, but hot coffee and things. Yes. Yeah, I'll hand you over to Atul, the project assistant of the UNESCO Chair, for a more formal introduction. Welcome to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Welcome, everyone. If I may introduce Professor Asberg to you. Professor Cecelia Asberg at Linköping University in Sweden is an interdisciplinary cultural scholar with a focus on the technologies, biologies, and ecologies of the now and the arts of living with changes on a damaged planet. She is a pioneer of gender studies, blue and environmental humanities, and feminist science and technology studies in Sweden. In 2008, she founded the Post-Humanities Hub, an interdisciplinary collaborative center that has helped to reformulate the relationship between humans and nature. She has published extensively on cyborg feminist approaches to embodiment and environment, but also worked on biodiversity, waste, and visual AI technologies. A recent publication is Promises of Cyborgs, Feminist Practices of Posthumanities Against the Nested Crisis of the Anthropocene in NORA, which is the Nordic Journal of Feminist and Gender Research. Her talk today is titled Eating at the Sea, Blue Humanities and Ocean Science Literacy. Over to you, Professor Asberg.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be here again and to be invited by Professor Prabhu Nayar and Professor Anna Kurian and for this UNESCO Chair talk in vulnerability studies. I am tremendously happy to be here again and actually also to see some familiar faces that actually I encountered last year. So if we have a similar research interest, like you and me, Aro Sharko, for instance, please don't be a stranger, but really do contact me over email and we can exchange literature references. But my warmest thanks for having me here. And I'm finding myself a little bit vulnerable myself today with a little bit of a cough, as mentioned before. But I want to start out here with trying to situate my perspectives as a Scandinavian, and that big blue arrow that you see there, I try to point out Linköping, which is the town where this university, Linköping University, is located. And what you see here is actually the outlines of a very shallow sea, the Baltic Sea, which is connecting the Scandinavian countries with Russia, with Finland, with Poland, Germany, and many other countries. So on the northern climes. So these are where my little exposure stories will mostly find themselves today. So I'm also trying to make the blue humanities research that I've done in the past meet up a little bit with a new and emerging interest in food studies. So I will be talking a little bit with a focus on metabolism and on eating and who eats who. And at least I hope I hope to be able to ask some questions that we can explore together in the little Q&A together, but also in the research that I'm doing together with my fantastic research colleagues here at Linköping University within the Post-Humanities Hub. Now, the Post-Humanities Hub, okay, that did not work as expected. Let me see here. So sorry for this. So, yes, please. We tried this, my dears, before, and it worked, and now it doesn't work. Oh, I want to change my slides, but I will try different.
You could perhaps go back to the presenters mode. I mean, probably that should.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's see here if. I think I need to do that, but let me just try. Is it changing?
No, not yet. Not yet.
No. Okay, I will need to stop sharing for a moment and return with the slides again. What I wanted to just share with you this image of the group, so that you, in case you are able to attend our webinars online, you are so warmly welcome. I want you to know that. And we are very honored to have Professor Pramod Nayar in our International Advisory Board for this very post-conventional research group. But in this research group, we are really trying to connect a lot of enlivened forms of humanities research, multi-species, and trying to explore new ways of emboldening and embodying actually the humanities. So we draw on a lot of gender studies research, both social science and humanities research, on science and technology studies, and of course a lot of environmental humanities. So I think it's fair to say that we try to see post-humanities as a form of human, but also more than human humanities, as a very interdisciplinary house, if you wish, with many rooms. And constantly there are being new staircases built into this research group. So there's a myriad of expressions of very interdisciplinary research going on. So, of course, my location in these northern climes, in the Scandinavian regimes and North European settings, and in the literatures of foremost gender studies, culture studies, and science and technology studies, all of this will, of course, delimit a little bit my perspectives. But I hope that that you can also enlighten me and bring your cases. Send them to me over email so we get the kind of conversation started. At least that's for how I think research should be, that it is an ongoing conversation. And all of this is of course needed because in an all too humanized world, environmental storytelling finds itself in desperate times, but I think also in times of opportunity, thinking about the global sustainable development goals. And it really matters now what stories tell stories, as Marilyn Strathern, a famous anthropologist and feminist science and technology studies scholar, said. And she said this already in the 90s. And building on that embrace of storytelling, Donna Haraway famously continued, and I quote here, it matters what matters we used to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell other stories with. It matters what thoughts think thoughts. What descriptions describe descriptions. It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories. End quote. But put simply, wording, the way we store things is really a conduit of worlding. It matters what stories get told. So in the vernacular of some of the literatures that I've been publishing alone and together with scholars like Marietta Radomska, Strida Neymanis, and many others, I think that we need to think of the oceanic in terms of storing exposures and exposure stories. And from the various interdisciplinary perspectives of feminist and very critical and very interdisciplinary post-humanities, I am bringing together a few exposure stories in this talk. Apologies. And of course, why I believe it is particularly important to think with the ocean, with marine environments. I'm desperately trying to change the slides here. Apologize. Here we go. Can you see a new slide?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So is because the ocean, of course, I mean, we're living on a blue planet. So the ocean is really what connects us all. Of course, the ocean, to state something very obvious, the ocean is the planet's largest ecosystem. So the stakes inherent in climate change have turned out to be entangled, of course, in the many hazards affecting coastal and marine ecosystems. And many scientists around the world have embraced, has provided evidence, of course, that global warming is interlinked with rising sea levels. Of course, and in the Arctic, actually, the ices are up here in the north, the ices are melting, I think 4 times as fast. And of course, it's linked with the warming of waters, creates acidification of the oceans, and to the detriment of all the, critters in the seas. And of course, we have a dwindling of fish population. Overfishing is rampant, and we are also dealing with bleaching of coral reefs, and kelp forests and coral reefs are absolutely monumental ecologies on in the ocean and in the seas and on this blue planet. And we also have, of course, connected to global warming and the warming of the oceans, a dwindling number of species. Biological diversity is dwindling. We have, of course, a great number of endangered marine species, but I will not talk so much about that today. But scientific facts have made us realize that the future of our blue planet, a marine habitat per default, one might say, hinges really on the bluing of our cultural imaginary. We need to imagine our relationship with the sea, with the ocean in new ways. And situated, as mentioned, in northern climes myself, I learned that global warming unfolds 4 times faster here than anywhere else on the planet. That is scary. And slow but violent changes to marine environments and to blue biodiversity. And where, for instance, my own backyard, as I call it, the Baltic Sea, apologies, are really deeply entangled in the nested problems, where in Sweden we often think of it that we need more scientific or technological solutions. But I honestly believe, with many scholars in interdisciplinary humanities, that we need more of a bluing of our imaginary. We need more fantasy. We need new ways of imagining ourselves and our relationship in the world as being of the world as well. So I will in this talk begin from the position that these interlinked problems of human environmental impact on oceans and coastal areas require really connected, effective, and cultural approaches of environmental literacy to really then complement scientific data or to complement different approaches in art or in citizen science. And we need to learn to consume better with the sea. So I'll try to focus this talk a lot on the metabolism, our marine metabolism. And helpful in this regard is, of course, the tremendous amounts of literature that are existing. And these are some beautiful pictures from the Baltic Sea, the big limestone rock of an island called Gotland on the Baltic Sea. And you see here in November how harsh, cold, and dark it is really here. And we are now here in Sweden returning from the few months we have of sun and going into the darker period here again. And you see a little bit of that brown algae that is so crucial to life at sea, which is, bladder wracks and kelps that are amassing on the coasts. Now, I hope you can see a big fish on the screen now. Yes. So what I really hope to do here is to, of course, continue to make a brief case for what we can do with blue humanities and with ocean science literacies in very interdisciplinary veins. But I'm doing this, of course, under the umbrella of SDG 14, which is life below water. So it refers to the Sustainable Development Goals, which calls for the conservation and sustainable use of oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. And the SDG is, of course, addressing human threats to marine ecosystems, including marine pollution, overfishing, and ocean acidification. And it's doing so with the aim of protecting marine and coastal areas, reducing pollution, plastic pollution, for instance, and ending overfishing and ensuring the resilience of oceanic life. So I believe strongly, and I hope to inspire you too in this, that we need both the science and art and humanities, literatures, rekindled to really instill this sense of wonder, to instill this sense of bluing of our cultural imagination. So we need a kind of cultivating a sense of amazement for life below water. And in our help, of course, we do have a lot of literature. There is an abundance, actually, of literature that takes us under the surface. I would just like to mention these novels, but also point out the kind of intermediate connections that are very apparent and are in, for instance, the Netflix little short documentary, My Octopus Teacher, and our interest in more tentacular creatures and the kind of mysterious things that are going on at the bottom of the sea. And for those of you interested in reading or in exploring the kind of blue imaginary in these types of literatures, I would warmly recommend Okarafu's Lagoon and Our Wives Under the Sea, but also the little Netflix documentary, My Octopus Teacher. But there is an amazing amount of literatures that we can turn to. I hope dearly that you, my friends, can follow a difference in slides here. Do let me know if you can't. Now, I believe it's very important to think about SDG 14 and the aims, you remember, to conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, and marine resources. Because despite our growing awareness and a keen interest in the oceanic, actually our ocean health is really declining due to, of course, plastic pollution, acidification, deoxygenation, and warming waters. All these are chemically connected. But it's also deteriorating the state of our oceans due to insufficient enforcement of marine protected areas. And this, as some of you here in the audience are very familiar with, there is an ongoing territorial struggle for the bottom of the sea, for the seabed and seabed minerals that are being imagined to be a new fantastic economy. And of course, there's a lot of interest in this and horrible power struggles. But there's also a lack of protection for both species and uncharted territories. And there's a lack of integration of blue carbon ecosystems. For instance, mangrove trees or kelp forests, as you see here from the Swedish west coast, actually, and seagrass into the various national climate plans. So this is why I think we can take a moment to stay a little bit with a kelp. And the kelp forests, as they are actually receding. Kelp forests are everywhere on our planet, or as you can see in this image here, they are along the coasts of and as already Charles Darwin noted, the number of living creatures of all orders whose existence intimately depends on kelp is wonderful. And I can only compare these great aquatic forests of the southern hemisphere with the terrestrial ones in the intertropical regions. Yet if any country forest was destroyed, I do not believe as many species of animals would perish as would here from the destruction of kelp. So this is telling of how already Darwin saw the importance of these underwater forests are as habitat. They are providing, they are the ecology for a lot of species. It's like nurseries for little fish and for all the other creatures. So kelp forests they are really receding, retracting, disappearing with the warming waters of climate change. Water becomes too warm, so that sea urchins, for instance, just eat away at the brown algae, the kelps. So the kelps, these kelp forests are receding with the warming waters of climate change. And this alarming fact needs actually to be taken very seriously because there are many benefits of a kelp that we don't even know of, actually. And lining up with this emergency, I have during the last 5 years noticed kind of an algal turn in arts and humanities. It's like a subcategory of the oceanic turn within the environmental humanities. So many artists and scholars are now relate to the aesthetics of these multi-species ecologies below water. So the rack zone, it doesn't sound like an important place, but the rack zone is more important. And, asking that question throughout my talk, what is, waste, apparent or seeming like waste to someone can be nourishment for others. So the rack zone or rack the wrack line along coasts, it's really this or a coastal feature where a lot of organic material, for instance, seagrasses and kelps, and a lot of other debris is deposited at high tide along the coast. So this zone acts as a natural input of marine resources into a terrestrial system, providing food and habitat for a variety of coastal organisms. But the meaning of wrack is also to utterly ruin. And I would actually like us to stay a little bit with the trouble of the wrack zone, to stay in the wrack zone. The very word wrack comes from Old English, to bring revenge or vengeance. It is a very archaic word that connotes ruin, destruction, to wreck. The wreck is, of course, the remains. But with the Roman poet Virgil actually even described algae in this very detrimental way. Nihil vilior alga. There's nothing more worthless, he said, than washed up seaweed. But I think he was very wrong. So even if these words now are credited to this poet, I think art and art in the wrack zone actually can help us reimagine and actually see how important brown algae, kelp forests under the ocean, under the surface of the ocean, and the wrack can really be a tremendous plenitude. I would like to sneak into my paper here again and this talk when focusing a little bit on what you see here is actually bladderwracks. But the bladderwracks and kelps, they grow in large densities, forming so-called kelp forests, which appeared for actually the first time in the Miocene epoch, which is about 23 to 5.3 million years ago, a long time ago. And it actually covers almost a fourth of the world's coastline. And it's particularly thriving in very cold and nutrient-rich waters. And brown macroalgae grow very fast, faster than tropical bamboo. And in the sunnier season, their growth can reach over 30 centimeters per day. And especially in turbulent waters, it really likes those, turbulent waters, where nutrients can wash over these multicellular organisms that make up the kelp's plant-like structure. So in their holobiont relationship with bacteria and other species, other marine species, macroalgae provide a foundational function of many of the world's sea ecologies. As detritus, the wrack zone, the wrack, the waste of decomposing kelp, as it sinks to the seabed, kelp as a kind of waste really offers nourishment and sanctum of all kinds for all kinds of sea creatures. The biological conviviality of kelp ecologies is really astonishing, and so are their atmospheric abilities. And you might have heard this before. At the planetary level, algae, and I'm not just talking about brown algae or green algae or red algae, but all kinds of algae. They appear really as a force with terraforming powers. That's been transforming the Earth into a breathable habitat. Algae actually in the first place oxygenated the planet. So it provided this planet with most of its oxygen, and it continued to do so. So algae, however small, is very important. So as
Did we lose her again?
I think we did, sir. Yes, we lost.
no.
We.
Oh no.
Oh no, we can hear you now.
Okay.
But
But you can,
we
but
can
you
see
can
you.
see
Yes,
me.
we can hear him.
Oh,
Yes.
I am so terribly sorry for the internet connection here. But we've been doing a lot of different types of research, and you can find, if you Google my weird Swedish last name, Asberg, the A with the circle above, you will find publications on kelps and on the wrack zone. And I'm very keen for your thoughts on this literature. But very important to say here is that algae are really, a type of environmental body that we don't think of as an gigantic body that can really transform the world, but it has already transformed the world. And with the human impact, it is transforming the planet again. So, because as you are very in the know of already, that this whole planet is a marine habitat. I mean, at least to 71% of, as marine biologists are saying, the planet, the Earth, is actually really a marine habitat, despite being called Earth. Now, let me see if this works with changing slides again. I can't believe. So let me change slides, and the focus of my talk slightly. We have talked about, I've been trying to story the exposures of wrack and algae, but there's a lot of exposures. Also, people are experiencing suffering really from environmental havoc. As indicated in the 2018 Global Witness Report. Actually, between the years 2002 and 2017, over 2,000 environmental defenders, as they say, activists or local community members, NGO staff, lawyers, journalists, and indigenous people that are fighting for the protection of land and sea and other natural resources. They were killed in countries, predominantly those countries in the global south. So these deaths of people usually occurred in relation to conflicts around the extraction and extractivism of natural resources by companies that often lacked legal property rights, but nonetheless perpetuated old colonial patterns of appropriation, control, dispossession, and destruction. So along with ecological disasters, like the famous Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. These murders, accompanied by threats and acts of intimidation towards activists striving to protect natural resources and waters, are some of the oft-cited examples of direct environmental violence that is taking its toll on human lives. So it's become clear that climate change, environmental degradation, and diminishing biological diversity constitute the key pillars of an ethico-political crisis, really of planetary proportions. And I just want to emphasize the oceanic side of this. And what has also become increasingly apparent in this period that some insist on calling the Anthropocene is that not all forms of environmental violence are as immediate or as spectacular as the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe. A lot of these murders of environmental activists actually are not, heralded or not making news really, but happening in secret. So not all forms of environmental violence is spectacular, as these statistics seem to suggest. Rather, there is an environmental violence that is much more insidious and which takes place on a much grander scale of time. And as environmental humanities scholar Rob Nixon argues, there is this type of violence, and he uses the term slow violence, which, and I quote, occurs gradually and out of sight, a violence of delayed destruction that is dispersed across time and space, an attritional violence that is typically not viewed as violence at all, end quote. So Earth's geosphere, its biosphere, including, the human bodies in the biosphere, the hydrosphere, and the atmosphere being affected through climate change, deforestation, the loss of biodiversity, plastic pollution, wars, toxic and radioactive in their aftermath, and ocean acidification, amongst others, are all examples of a slowly unfolding and frequently overlooked violence that takes place kind of out of sight. But it's certainly not without consequences for human and non-humans alike. So simultaneously, both the spectacular and the slow forms of environmental violence mobilize affective responses, not only feelings of despair, anxiety, or anger, but also grief experienced in relation to the present and anticipated ecological losses of species, ecosystems, and meaningful landscapes that have or shortly will result from severe anthropogenic environmental change. So, such ecological grief is described by scholars as a disenfranchised form of grief, which is to say that one it's not openly accepted or acknowledged in society. It may be written about in novels. It may be experienced by individuals as well as groups or communities. But far from being a disabling effect, ecological grief has the potential to generate reparative actions, we claim. As such, it's something that must be considered in any discussion of environmental violence and the new oceanic imaginaries that are needed. Oi, sorry. Let's see if I can. Yeah. So let me stay a little bit longer with some exposures of the Baltic Sea. My backyard oceanic neighborhood. So, and this I want to frame in the kind of post-humanist frame of thinking like this, that it's becoming more and more evident to us that the environment is really in us, and we humans are definitely fully in the environment, both physically and affectively. So this makes the conventional concepts of nature and culture as seemingly dichotomous or hierarchically arranged entities. It makes this division obsolete. Nature is really not separable from culture, quite the contrary. The enmeshment of nature and culture should be seen as merely the mundane site of contestation of society for societal power and violence, but also care, affect, and coexistence. So clearly this situation does not just have theoretical and disciplinary ramifications. The stakes are high for politics and ethics at large, for people and for, let's call them, non-human peoples as well. So it really matters which nature cultures get materialized and stored, and therefore who gets to flourish and which ones gets to suffer or die or disappear. And this is to, I hope, invoke in you an understanding of how the research that we do in gender and gender studies, in intersectional understandings of identity and environment and violence, in these veins of environmental humanities and post-humanities, through a very post-disciplinary critique of anthropocentric speciesism, the thing that we call feminist post-humanities, how this is really playing into what we are doing here when we are researching blue the bluing of the imagination and blue science and blue humanities. So the management of, for instance, invasive species might be one example close to hand, but I will not go into that. Importantly, we all inhabit, embody, and embed in the world differently as variously situated people, divided by national, sexual, religious, bodily, and economic status, and as very variously situated non-humans in an increasingly anthropogenic world. Gender, race, class, and other power differentials, including species which mark living bodies, render them vulnerable and prone to environmental and other types of violence in very different ways that routinely actually borrow gestures from human to human xenophobia, sexism, racism, and biological determinism. Now, let me turn to the Baltic Sea. So, in and around the Baltic Sea, one of the most environmentally exposed and researched marginal seas in the world, actually, we can find those differences between people and between human and non-human inhabitants and how they play out as multi-species politics, which is really shaping the Baltic Sea today and for a foreseeable future to come. With intensified shipping, migration and trafficking, with waning fish stocks, with oil pipes and internet cables, with militarization, intense militarization now with the threats from Russia, and with the historical wartime heritage of the Baltic Sea, with its eutrophication, pollution, and invasive species. The Baltic Sea is today really a nature cultural domain of renewed territorialism. While mostly surrounded by land, it is connected to North Sea through Kattegat and Skagerrak. The North Sea itself endures significant pressures from industry and agriculture, as well as extensive fisheries, intensive shipping, and increasingly expanding various forms of mariculture, such as Norwegian salmon farming, which is not taking place in Sweden, but of course in Norway. And as you know, the ocean is really what connects us. So at the same time, ship ballast water and the unexpected transport of fish and shellfish are primarily responsible for the introduction of alien species into these waters, or as in all the waters, and how such environmental exposures get stored, what effects emerge, how values and social imaginaries get shared, and how new communities can be forged. That really matters. So since the end of the World War II, the major military powers have dumped a lot of chemical warfare agents, such as mustard gas, taboon, and levisate into the planet's oceans, into all of the planet's oceans. And indeed, it was actually intended as a peaceful, like a farewell to arms, where whole ships were filled with hazardous military waste, like munitions and such, and they were deliberately sunk and weaponry just tossed overboard en masse. These are acts that reveal a view of the oceans as an endless medium of purification, something that Blue Humanities scholar Melody Jew has developed on beautifully since. One particularly intensive site for dumping of European military stocks was actually the Gotland Deep, that Swedish little limestone island in the Baltic Sea. So it's in a trench in the middle of the very shallow Baltic Sea. So, however, this story of the refiguring of the Baltic and the North Seas by human hand would not be complete without also recognizing that the pollution caused by such military waste is only compounded by the constant inflow of invasive chemicals from pharmaceuticals and fertilizer runoffs from land. Add to this the arrival of non-local animal species in these waters, and the picture that emerges of the Baltic Sea is one of devastation, really. Indeed, It is reported that, and I quote, invasive alien species are listed among the most important factors threatening the aquatic biodiversity in the Baltic Sea, together with eutrophication, contaminants, overfishing, and destruction of habitats. So the Baltic Sea is listed as one of the largest dead zone areas in the world. And this, of course, only intensifies one's sense of witnessing a profound tragedy happening before our very eyes. So in the critical literature, this very term dead zone refers to a body of water where oxygen levels have been completely depleted, resulting in the disappearance of marine life. While hypoxia or suffocation or low oxygen levels may occur naturally from time to time during the past century, it has clearly been induced and sustained now en masse by nutrient pollution. So the disposal, for instance, of sewage and wastewater and the inflow of nitrate agents from the land into the sea. So the warming waters that has resulted from climate change have also affected a plethora of ecological alternations in these seas. So these are examples of slow violence that are having huge effects. And together with my colleagues, we are trying to think about the metabolisms of the sea in terms of low trophic theory. And that is a type of theory that is interested in nature cultural research, arts and sciences, on the effects and violence and care within the frameworks of an environmental post-humanities. And we hope to engage, of course, a coexistential ethics of environmental adaptability informed by feminist theory and, of course, vulnerability studies. So we engage here in our research with recent theorizations of exposure, toxicity, stress, slow violence, and vulnerability in the interdisciplinary literatures of post-humanities like Nayar and Kurian's work. And more than human, environmental humanities or post-humanities, they break from traditional methodological practice and demonstrate that the composition of the subject of the study, including extinction events, damaged heritage sites, everyday designs, queer animal relations, species data, and so on, are always a confluence of entangled meanings, matterings, and actors, techno-ecologies, if you wish. And we are, of course, trying to stay with the trouble. I would like to stay with this exposure story of chemical weapons and military waste a brief while longer. But I do not have that much time, but I will try to shorten my talk here a little bit. But it's interesting, perhaps, from contemporary perspectives to militarization, to look at previous militarization and what it did to the sea. Because in the Baltic Sea, from 1946 to the 1960s, it's estimated that several hundred thousand tons of chemical and conventional weapons were dumped and scattered into the waters of Northern Europe. And the density of military waste, including sunken, decommissioned whole ships filled with munitions, is particularly large outside Bornholm and the southeast of Gotland in the Baltic Sea. Over the decades, tons of metallic canisters and containers have corroded and have been leaking their toxic contents into aquatic habitats, forging really a sinister heritage of military waste, nationalism, and territorial proto-European masculinity, if you wish, at sea. Although no precise records are made of this often clandestine dumping, there is an estimation that after the World War II, approximately 10,000 tons of munitions and toxic agents were dumped in the Gotland Basin in the Baltic Sea alone. The Allied forces and the militaries across the world often disposed the munitions and chemical weapons in deep ocean waters, but the Soviet military unloaded as much as 15,000 tons in the very shallow waters of the Baltic Sea. So there is a lot of these canisters actually still lying there and corroding. And actually sometimes fishermen, the very few local fishermen that are still working the coastal line of the Baltic Sea, sometimes they do get these unwanted mustard gas canisters in their nets. But we can also, as we've been visiting veterinary labs in Stockholm, see that seals are finding these mustard gas canisters and becoming affected by, on their snouts, you can see the traces of chemical gas. And the idea was, of course, that the waters of the ocean would dilute the toxins, and it does, but also it stays with our bodies. This idea that the oceanic nature is separate from our human life, we just simply have to abandon that, because we do get the toxins inside our own bodies as we eat, for instance, the fin fish and other creatures that are living in these toxic waters. So the dominant cause of dead zone areas at the bottom of the Baltic Sea is, of course, pollution, agricultural pollution, the inflow of nutrients from fertilizers, detergents, and other substances that are containing high amounts of nitrogen or phosphorus. And this, the problem with overnourishment, if you wish, of the Baltic Sea waters is a much, much bigger problem to the metabolism of the sea of which we are part than these chemical gas canisters. That's a much, much bigger problem than the tiny, well, that's all, of course, relative. the chemical gas pollution that comes from the leftover military waste. Sorry. I will very briefly turn to my last case of storing exposure, and will actually use salmon as a guiding non-human figure here, and the work of the artistic duo Cooking Sections, which is Daniel Fernandez Pascual and Alon Schwabe together, who have been exploring salmon. So I hope you still can hear or see me, and perhaps see the slide as well, because this is a beautiful palette of colors. So it used to be a luxury food. Now salmon consumption is 3 times higher in the US, in Europe and Japan than it was in the 1980s. And the demand is growing fast. Salmon farming, a form of aquaculture that entails raising a specific strain, a specific genetic strain of the Atlantic salmon, of the Norwegian genetic salmon, from egg to market, and keeping the fish in net cages in marine settings along, for example, the Norwegian, the Irish, and the Scottish coast, but also outside the coast of Chile in South America. It's the fastest growing food production system in the world. Wild capture fishery landings have been stagnant since the 1990s, and wild populations of finfish are, we know it, dwindling fast. There is this huge demand for food from the planet's growing human population. And this has put, salmon farming center stage. So in the spotlight is the Atlantic salmon, a species that's been genetically bred from a very Norwegian strands for faster growth and economic gain. So in the same way that flamingos turn pink, the iconic pink hue of the salmon actually comes from wild salmon eating shrimps and krill. which allows the fish to ingest the coloring compound astaxanthin. So the farm-raised version of salmon that we find in, for instance, Swedish stores allows the fish have been naturally gray colored. Actually, the flesh is actually gray, were it not for their chemically engineered feed, which adds then this pink color to the desired degree. So you can order what kind of color the salmon should have in the store by feeding the salmon in these fish cages particular exact amounts of astaxanthin. So an art installation at Tate Modern explored the oddity of the color of farmed salmon, this cooking sections do. And they described salmon as, and I quote, the color of wild fish, which is neither wild nor fish, nor even salmon, end quote. So a post-natural species par excellence, this farmed salmon hosts an array of negative impacts on the ocean, and it really contributes to a persistent environmental violence. It adds to eutrophication, to the loss of biodiversity, not only through the constant employment of chemicals and antibiotics in the farming practice, but through the excess nutrients that the industry inevitably spills into the local environment. In essence, what such fish farming describes is the cultivation of high trophic marine species that are the top predators of their ecosystems. Like this salmon is actually like the, lions or hyenas were they on land, but which sustainable science has shown depends on an unsustainable level of energy consumption because they need to eat so much, given the environmental footprint necessary for production. So put simply, the calorific and nutritional product of such enterprises cannot justify the amount of chemicals put into the farming environment, the suffering of the fish, or the eutrophication that only commonly sees around such areas where they have this salmon farming. So even from an anthropocentric viewpoint of sustainability, one must conclude that there is an urgent need for alternative ways of producing nutritious food and biomass from the sea. But salmon farming is not the solution. Instead, there is, of course, artists and creators and nutritional experts that are exploring algae, brown and blue algae. And I need to round off here a little bit. Well, I believe that time has run away from me a little bit. But it's curious. It's a curious situation, says Rachel Carson, that the sea from which life first arose should now be threatened by the activities of one form of that life. But the sea, through changed in a sinister way, will continue to exist. The threat is rather to life itself. And I think that this quote from Rachel Carson, paired with a quote from Donna Haraway, that whether we are exploring alternative creative ways of nourishing ourselves with the sea, not exploiting the sea, but nourishing with the sea, regardless of that, outcomes are never guaranteed, as Haraway says. There's no teleological warrant here, no assured happy or unhappy ending, sociologically, ecologically, or scientifically. There's only the chance of getting on together with some grace. And with these words, I thank you for allowing this talk. Oi! Oh. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yes, we'll now open the floor for questions. Roy Matthew has a question. Roy, please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Asberg. It was, as always, a very enlightening talk. Since you mentioned salmon and you mentioned how they are like lions and hyenas in the sea, one way that we humans upset the oceanic balance, one of several ways, is that we always hunt the predators. So what happens is there's a proliferation globally of the smaller species because there's no predators to hunt them.
Yeah.
Now, one interesting phenomenon that can be observed in only two places in the world, one is Laguna in Brazil and the other is Kerala in India, is something called dolphin assisted fishing, where it's very interesting. It's where the fishermen, local fishermen, they collaborate with wild dolphins, mind you, not domesticated, wild dolphins. So the wild dolphins, they drive the smaller fish species into the estuaries where the fishermen are waiting with nets. So the fishermen also, they get their fair share of fish, and the dolphin can also catch the fish that escape the net and try to go back. And the most interesting thing about this is that the dolphin actually communicate to the fishermen through tail slaps and other signals that we are coming, we are chasing them your way, stand ready for us. So it's like, it's like Donna Haraway says, it's a way of getting on with some grace, even though I accept that it doesn't change the global picture much because it only happens in two places. But still, I felt like I should point it out because there are ways in which we could coexist, and as this illustrates, we are not by any means the only animal capable of intelligence. So thank you,
Yes.
Professor Asberg.
Thank you. I think this is a very astute remark and a very clever example of, that we can, and we do already collaborate with many species. So thank you for, it was called assisted fishing, or what did you say first, the first word?
Dolphin assisted fishing.
Yes. Dolphin assisted fishing. Thank you. Speaking about multi-species collaborations. Thank you. I see that there is more people who want to join our conversation here, Roy.
Sharko has a question.
Hello,
Please go ahead. Yes.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Moru Sharko. Ma'am, two questions for you. Hello, ma'am. One is that you just talked about krills going down, the population of krills and kelps going down, and that is why we find that there's a decline in the population of the salmon fishes. Ma'am, when we do talk about salmon fishing, don't we also need to counter in the factor of the tragedy of the commons? That is one question. The second question is that you were also talking about the extinction of species, specifically marine species. So this is a more interesting question for me, that when we do talk about extinction of species, we mainly talk about extinction of land-based species. We usually do not talk about extinction of marine species. And since human beings have not explored much of the oceans, and much of the oceans remains unknown to us, there may be some species which have already gone extinct, which may have been very valuable to human beings. Say a fish species which could cure cancer or fight with AIDS or something like that, and that has already gone extinct. So do you think that there is any way that science and culture could really address this problem of extinction, especially given the fact that we are now in the part called the ocean decade, which the UN has declared?
Yes. I cannot underline more what you are saying here, that actually extinction, marine species extinction, and diminishing biodiversity at seas, it's a horrible threat to people. If you want to keep it human-centered, it's a horrible threat to us as people, but it is of course a horrible threat to life on the planet, larger than just human interests. So thank you for pointing that out. And as you krill and shrimp and all these species are diminishing, finfish are dwindling. I actually have a lot of family that used to be fishermen from on the west coast, and actually in the 1950s in Sweden, they were just throwing shiploads of fish onto the boats, and now there is basically nothing in the waters. I mean, it's really almost, it is so scary how little fish there is. But as you mentioned, the finfish are like at the top of the predatory. If we look below the stages below on trophic orders. Shrimps and krill are also diminishing, and these are, the food for our food, so to speak. So that is tremendously important. And extinction of species in the marine areas are, I think, even more detrimental than extinction of species on land, because for the obvious reason that we are living on a blue planet. You were also talking about the tragedy of the commons. Yes. And so we have had a highly unregulated use of natural resources, like fish. It's been a few multinational companies have exploited, fishing, and like there's a specific branch of the market now that is focused on salmon and genetically engineered a particular kind of salmon, and selling that to the world market. And all this resource exploitation is, of course, pulling the rug from under all of our feet. So it's really destroying for everybody. And I believe that there are many of you who are interested in this. And I know that one of you here is actually doing research on the deep sea and deep sea exploitation. And that is, another tragedy of the commons in the making as we speak. So keep an eye on that and do what you can with research and poetry. Thank you for the question.
Thanks a lot. Ashish Smithy has a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Atul. Hello, Professor Asberg. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. You brought up Melody Dew in your discussion. I remember reading her book, Wild Blue Media. And if I remember correctly, a quote stands out. She writes about how
We can't hear you, Asha. We seem to have lost you.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
now we can. Yes.
Okay. Atul, can you update me on the last part of what you heard?
We heard you mention Melody Dew's wonderful book,
Wild Blue Media.
Wild Blue Media. It's everybody should read that.
Yes, absolutely agree. There's quote that stands out in my mind, which is she talks about how the oceanic as a medium can offer a way out of our terrestrially inflected ways of thinking. And while I'm not familiar with much of reading in blue humanities, I happen to have read a few, and I've discerned a pattern. There's this sense of associating the ground, the earth, with stability and solidity, while the ocean itself becomes a source of resisting proprietary and territorializing relations. I was wondering if there's a way of sharpening this analytic without further crystallizing the divide between hydro and geos.
I think you just did. I think that was a very astute starting point, for this type of not crystallizing, to use your word, our thinking around Earth. And there is indeed this this tendency in, at least in Western, philosophy. I mean, just think about Freud. Not very popular these days, but Sigmund Freud and his thinking about the psyche as this fluid state, and all the writing in cultural theory in the 1980s in post-structuralists around fluidity and waters and the oceanic as this unsolid domains. So I think that you actually have discovered this, that actually, because of course the fluidity of the sea, the fluidity of our bodies, of the contours of our bodies, and which connects to ideas of femininity as well, if you wish, of leaking bodies, actually does not hold up, because the earth, I think, and all matters are actually fluid, even though it's at a slower rate. So I think this is something one should work on more in philosophical terms, and I think it would have tremendous. So I just want to thank you for that, because I think that would have a tremendous feminist and queer feminist and critical value in thinking this through even more. And it would be, you could do this, in conversation with Melody Jew's work on medium and water as medium, and thinking about, soil is also, of course, can be thought of as a medium. Think about, the multi-species kind of layers of bacteria, mycelium, humus, and roots, and the chemicals. Of course, that too can be imagined as medium, in the sense that Melody Jew helps us think. So clever remark. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Now that we've spoken about soil as a medium itself, taken back to Tim Ingold, and he's an anthropologist, and he talks about the ground as a medium, an immersive medium, a world without objects.
Yeah, I didn't know that, or I had forgotten about it, but that's a good one. Of course, I think there is value to not flattening our ontologies completely, because we need to have some kind of politics, right? We cannot say that everything is worth exactly the same thing, that a germ is. I cannot say that as a feminist scholar, as an anti-racist feminist scholar. I cannot say that a germ has the same value as a human life. I cannot, and I don't want to. So we do need a kind of a feminist politics here of relationality and politics that works, for various locations and situated practices. So, and I'm saying this as someone then who I would go out and march on the streets for human rights, any day. But at the same time, as I, when I'm in my office, you can see it here, writing philosophical treatises, or working with marine biologists, or when I do that, I am of course thinking more in post-humanist terms. So we can have several thoughts in our heads at the same time. I strongly believe we can. So I don't know if that was a helpful comment or not, but there are differences between the kind of feminist ethics of vulnerability and affirmation that is infusing the kind of feminist post-humanities that I'm doing, and many of my colleagues are doing, and at least the straw figure of object-oriented ontology that I'm painting here with probably a very unfair picture of Tim Morton's work. I think actually that Tim Morton has a much more nuanced take, but I'm just creating a little bit of a straw figure and divide here for, I hope, pedagogical purposes. But thank you for that evocative insight. Pramod, you have the best students. Do you know that?
Not all of them are students. Asha Smith is incidentally working on posthumanism.
Oh,
she's currently grappling with a chapter on plant horror and the vegetal monstrous.
Woo! Oy, oy, oy.
Lots of creepy stuff. It doesn't involve kelps and algae, but it involves several other things.
That sounds
So
lovely.
a couple of months ago, we
Maybe
were
he
discussing
wants to.
Alicia Wheatley's work, The Beauty.
Mm.
Yeah, right.
Is it okay if I just once again just extend this invitation to contact us, be part of the kind of online community of the post-humanist, because we need all kinds of perspectives and research, and the kind of monstrous sides of plant theory. I don't think we have seen that so much here. I haven't read
Right.
that much, and
It's
I would
up to
like.
Asha to get in touch. Yes.
Yes.
Asha?
Yes.
I would definitely love to keep up this conversation with you, and especially about geo monstrous as well, which Pramod sir and I have been working on for a while now.
Lovely.
Cecelia, all of them want to work on these terrifying things. Have you noticed? Everything is monstrous and
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but the monstrous keeps returning.
Yes, it does. It does. Yes.
Yeah.
Atul, over to you for a formal vote of thanks. But I would like to thank Cecelia, who, despite her illness, recovered sufficiently to talk to us, and amazing interaction, and an absolute brilliant insight into the blue humanities. For me, principally, her work on the low trophic lives has been singularly influential. So thank you, Cecelia. And I hope this has not put too much of a strain on you. Over to you, Atul.
Thank you, sir. Yes, just to extend, we are very grateful to Professor Cecelia Asberg for accepting an invitation and for giving her lecture and for engaging with the audience in such great detail and with such patience and generosity. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody in the audience for joining. Several of them do join regularly, and several new faces as well. So we hope that you join us for the subsequent talks as well. All these talks are being recorded and will be put up on the YouTube channel of the UNESCO Chair as well as the website. So do check it out. And the poster for today's talk was designed by Mabel Susan. So thank you to Mabel, and we hope that all of you join us again in the talks to come. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.